Welcome to the folks joining in. We've been looking forward to this chat and looking forward to kind of spreading it more widely too for lots of people to listen to. This really is like a redo of a one-on-one chat that Tom and I had a few weeks ago that I thought was super valuable for me. And I just thought it's something everybody should hear. And I think it's a topic that most people haven't heard Tom House talk about and maybe don't know his expertise in, but a topic that's just really important for every human, something that we all go through in different ways and need to have a toolkit to understand how to handle. So we're talking about stress and anxiety, which I think it's great timing for this chat because it used to be a topic that people were embarrassed to talk about. It was a difficult thing, or you would avoid it or pretend it didn't exist. Um, but it does exist for everybody, and the question is, how do you handle it? Just like pressure or anything else, we got to have the right toolkit to handle these things. So part of what we want to do at Mustard is make sure that all the young athletes that work with us know how to handle these things effectively, and that coaches and parents are well equipped to both give players the toolkit to handle these things, but then maybe also not commit some kind of common mistakes that we all make sometimes that can make the problems worse. So with that, Tom, thanks for doing this. And
Sure.
where do you want to start? Do you want to, should we, I mean, I know you made me start with like the definitions of stress and anxiety, but what do you
Yeah,
think?
and everybody thinks that stress and anxiety are really, really bad, and oh my gosh, we can't talk about it. And if you worry about that kind of stuff, you're never going to be competitive. What people don't realize is that the human being has to have a little stress in his life. It's distress that causes a problem. And people don't understand that anxiety is it's generated outside the body. It causes the same stress hormones inside the body. But if we didn't have anxiety, we wouldn't be able to worry about the future and or plan about the future. So if you kind of look at stress and anxiety, that something is, if you do it right, it's actually manageable and will help you compete. And then you combine that in with what our guy, Jason Goldsmith, does such a good job with, where you make your brain actually work for you with imagery and all the deep breathing techniques that he does. Then you can actually, you don't have to worry quite as much about that fourth leg of the health and performance table. Let me back up just a second. Stress is good in the right amount, and stress is generated inside of your body, not outside. It when things are getting a little bit more than you can control, which what happens is stress is manifested in issues that can be fixed with breathing. If you've ever been around anybody that has to do with mustard, before any one of our get-togethers, we go through a deep breathing exercise. So if you find yourself being stressed, breathing properly, deep breathing, and basically making it work for you will not only release the stress, but it will actually get your brain focusing at the right things at the right time for the right reason. Conversely, when it comes to anxiety, that comes from, it's generated from the inside, and it has the same effect on your hormones, your stress hormones, but your brain can't fix a problem that it has created. So you have to be very careful about when it comes to anxiety, what can you do physiologically to help you release or relieve the symptoms that are caused when your hormonal system goes crazy on you. And believe it or not, it's something as simple as smiling or laughing.
Mm.
And what that does, it releases all the good hormones to fight off the stress hormones. I hope I made sense. Stress is good, just stress is bad. When stress comes from the outside, you manage the process by breathing properly. Think of it as like putting energy back into your body. When you're distressed, you are burning energy and are really inefficient with what you're physically trying to do. Your brain has this unbelievable mechanism where it's big word is homeostasis. It's trying to find a balance for what you're going through in your competitive circumstances. So stress is dealt with by breathing properly before, during, and after an event. And anxiety is managed by simply putting a smile or a laugh into your system. And that will set the good hormones to fight the bad hormones. Now, I always have to caution somebody here. You can't have just given up a 2-run home run and be out on the mound going,
Right.
laughing about it. You kind of have to put the glove over your mouth, bend down, pick up the rosin, throw it down, and have a little laugh to yourself. And then I'm going to jump one more step ahead, and then we'll get Q&A, because you always ask great questions. The final cap to managing stress and anxiety in competition is to have an affirmation.
Hmm.
And an affirmation is a positive statement about self or task where you actually use your own name. It's third-party conversation with yourself. Athletes all do it, some of them better than others. Ricky Henderson is the one I use for an example, because every sentence he made was an affirmation about Ricky. Ricky be good. Ricky be the best. Ricky can dance. Ricky be rich. Ricky can steal bases. He was always telling himself. And when you talk to yourself, 90 trillion cells listen. And if you're talking to yourself in the right way, if you think you can and you think you can't, and you're talking that you can, your 90 trillion cells will try to do it correctly.
Yeah.
So it's that simple. Deep breaths, smile or laugh, and a positive affirmation about self or task where you use your own name. And that's as simple as it actually is.
So that was a really simple, incredible synopsis of what I would call the toolkit for dealing with when stress is becoming distress or when there's too much anxiety. Is that
Right.
a fair way to frame it?
Exactly. Your words are perfect.
And and just to summarize one other thing, is it correct to say that anxiety is stress when it's external? So something that's coming from the outside is more
Yeah,
anxiety.
when it comes from, let's go the other way around. When it comes from the outside,
Yep.
it's stress. When it comes from the inside, it's anxiety.
Okay.
Does
Got
that
it.
make sense? But you can you don't want to be stress-free, because you get better with stress. And you always want to be a little anxiety, because it forces you to plan ahead. Anxiety is nature's way of having you plan how not to run into the saber-toothed tiger tomorrow.
Right.
And for kids that lay awake the night before a game and over get too anxious, you should go over the game and play the game before the game in your brain, and then realize that it's always more stressful to think about tomorrow than to actually be in tomorrow. But
Well,
it's go ahead.
well, this is the way you and I started talking about it, was anxiety, but I think, for me personally, I do think a lot of it is really useful. I will end up the night before, a lot of nights, but the night before big meetings for sure, playing out in advance all the different ways these things can go and all the arguments I want to make or all the points I want to make. And they might say this and I might say this. Obviously, you can do too much of that. And I do too much of that sometimes, to the point that you affect your sleep, which is bad.
Yeah.
But when I get into the meeting, I've had the meeting already. So
Yeah.
sometimes that's quite useful. And I think the
So
trick
when you
is
say what you just said is so perfect. When you get in a meeting, you already had the meeting. And after 50 years of doing this as a player and a coach, it's always worse when you're anxious about it for tomorrow than it is when you're actually doing it at the given day. So
Absolutely.
don't think you're the only one. I used to think I was the only one that when I was warming up in the bullpen to go in a game, it was like, oh my God, it's like, oh, what am I doing? And then all of a sudden you get out in the game and it's, what was I so stressed about?
Yeah.
What was I so anxious about? So don't be afraid, but understand it is manageable. And then you mentioned something. If it is affecting the quality of your sleep, or you are literally going through so many things, I call it the whirlies, where you really can't get a handle on the tempo and the pace of the game, then you do have an issue. And that's where it's so important to be able to breathe deeply. Think of breathing deeply as a stress reduction mechanism that gets oxygen in your blood, allows your whole system to slow down just a notch. And then with the anxiety and all those things that happen to your hormones, the stress hormones that come with anxiety, just a little smile and a little laugh, and you're off to see the wizard. And then you put a ribbon around the whole thing by literally saying, Nolan's was very simple. After every pitch, ball be coming back from the catcher. You say, come on, Nolan, you can do this. Yes, you can. Now, 90 trillion cells just heard Nolan say, come on, Nolan, you can do this. And they're saying, okay, what are we going to do? Catcher calls fastball down and away. Game, set, and net.
Yeah. I've been using the smile thing when I've never talked to you about this, but when I go for runs and like towards the end of the run where I'm old and I'm getting tired and I don't want to go anymore, force myself to like smile or laugh, and gives me a little boost and keeps going.
Yeah, and people think, oh, that's crazy. It's not. It's actually science-based. It works. You just have to learn how to manage it for you. Now, I have some other things I'd like to add in.
Yeah.
If we need to talk about parents and coaches that they care too much, or they don't do coaches, or they create issues that aren't necessary, and what athletes should do if they have parents and coaches that their style of parenting and their style of coaching isn't conducive to the way that particular athlete performs. So you're a dad with two young kids, and there's things that you can do even now. And your son is 3 or 4 now.
Just turned 5.
Oh wow, where's the time go?
Yeah, I know.
So he's starting to understand exactly not only your spoken language, but your body language.
Yeah.
You can be looking at your boy and saying, I love you, but your body language says, I'm really frustrated with you. And what I need to point out here is the only thing more powerful than the spoken language is the unspoken language we call body language. Right? So put that in your mind. And then one of the things that I really like Jason Goldsmith to talk about, you can be in a crowd of 40,000 people and you can hear your mother clear her voice.
Yeah.
That's how in tune you are with parents. And parents need to realize that no matter how their child is doing in competition, their number one priority is to please mom and dad. Even when the teenage boy is embarrassed by his dad being there or really doesn't want him to say anything, the subconscious need state for all kids is to make their parents proud. So be aware of that. In fact, I've actually encouraged some parents to just go out. I used to watch my kids' games from left field fence where they couldn't see me or hear me, and it made it a lot easier. So the parent that is actually up in the stands cheering, come on, Jimmy, hit the ball, throw a strike, whatever, that's going to do more to ruin their concentration and their focus than whether they're successful or failing. So be aware that what your voice and or your body language, and I've seen even on the professional level when a parent is there and the dad is up there doing like this, doing dodging with them, and your kid can see that. He sees that intuitively without even knowing he's doing it. So be aware. There's a lot more communication going on than you actually believe.
I think that's really valuable for people to hear. And I think, let's get into even the communication we do realize, because I think all of us make mistakes with our kids on that. Sometimes mistakes we realize, mistakes we don't. So, I mean, just as a premise, okay, we have stress that comes from external factors. We have anxiety that comes from within. And we're looking for kind of optimal levels of each of those, some being good. Different people, I assume, naturally will have different levels of internal anxiety.
Yeah.
I guess my first question is, do you see a difference in natural anxiety levels for high performers versus average folks?
I'd like to be able to say yes. Some guys are flatliners, some guys are off. There is no, you can't predict everybody. Everybody processes differently, but everybody figures out a process that works for them. Let me take a step back. All the athletes that play to the best of their ability at the highest level that their capacity dictates have figured out a way to manage how they deal with stress, how they deal with anxiety, how they deal with affirmations, and how they deal with competition against people that are going through it the same way they are. Believe it or not, the Tom Brady's, the Nolan Ryans, the Greg Maddoxes of my generation, and the kids that are throwing today they all have the same issues. They all process a little differently. They learn how to manage whatever they do so it will allow them to compete. There's no perfect answer, but there is an answer that works for everybody if they're willing to look at it for what it is. It's a skill that can be learned, and you have to take all pieces of the input to make sure it works for you. If the way you learn and compete is different than the way your coach instructs and basically instructs you and puts you between the lines, someone has to do a reframe. You learn by hearing, by seeing, and by feeling. And if the way your coach is teaching you doesn't match the way you learn, you're going to have trouble in competition. So the key words, if you hear don't from anybody, don't hang this curveball. You've got 90 trillion cells that can't edit a good message from a bad message. They just edit. So don't hang a curveball. 90 trillion cells will do exactly that. They will try to hang the curveball. So as a parent, as a coach, or an athlete, listen for messages inside of a normal conversation where your subconscious mind will actually do what was suggested, even though they're trying to help. I like to tell a story about I was pitching in a playoff game against the Yankees, and Don Zimmer brought me in to face a guy named Chris Chambliss. And the last thing he said was, I don't care what you do, just don't let him take you deep. Before Zim got his fanny on the bench, the game was over. I had him a curveball. And this was a guy that I'd faced 40 times and probably got out 35 of them. But again, in those situations, it's amazing how a don't do coach or a don't do parent can negatively affect an outcome of a kid that is giving everything he possibly can physically, but somehow, some way, the back door channel got the wrong message. Did that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense to me. And by the way, folks, please put questions in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. I know we have some on Discord already. Tom, it seems to me like if we're trying to optimize young athletes' ability to handle stress and anxiety, and also kind of the levels of stress and anxiety that they're experiencing, it feels to me like this is one area of coaching where parents can be quite helpful.
Yes.
Going to be involved in that process, whether they like it or not. So they can be helpful. And it feels to me like they can be helpful because most parents really know their kids. That's one weapon we have as parents, right? Like we know our kids.
And the kids know their parents too. There's buttons that are
That's
pressed
the
on
danger.
both sides. Yeah.
So when you really know your kid, you know whether they're, in your words, a flatliner and don't really experience stress and anxiety in competition, or whether they're somebody that, regardless of whether maybe the rest of the world can see it, underneath the surface, they're really experiencing a lot of stress.
And either one is okay. Either one of those is okay. You just can't let their style and their whatever their processing mechanisms are get in the way of why they're in the game, which is because they love to play the game. They're playing baseball because they both need and want to be out there.
So for a parent or a coach, would you treat those two kids the same, or would you treat them differently?
Again, this is where parenting and being a child of parents who, it's a communication thing. And kids with both coaches and parents and authority figures, kids have to learn how to ask the right question or stick up for themselves. A lot of kids will say, I'm just going to keep my mouth shut because I don't want to call any attention to me. But problem identification is going to be half their solution. And if something, a coach is a style that he's, using to coach you doesn't work with your confidence level, then you have to let them know. And I always tell athletes and kids, say, Dad, help me out here, or Coach, help me out here. When you say that, I get a little anxious. Can we work so that there's a different way of saying that, or what you're asking me to do would make more sense, so that I don't get more nervous about trying to do what you're doing than doing what I think I need to do. And the communication process is so imperative in any situation where there's social interaction, where winning and losing or feeling good or bad are involved. But it's life. And the quicker you can figure it out, the better off you're going to be. Can I take a little tangent here real quick?
Yeah.
Usually the kid that is making the most noise on the bench is the one that's most insecure. The kids that go between the lines knowing that they've done everything they could possibly do to prepare for today's game or practice or to go to school to take this test, they're the ones that are going to, in the long haul, be more confident about the process than the outcome. And again, I'm going to hit this really hard because we live in an outcome world right now. Our society rewards outcome. And unfortunately, most people can't control their outcome. They can only control the process that gives them a better chance for a good outcome.
Yeah.
And I was blessed. My parents didn't know a whole lot about sports. My mom only cared about good grades in school, and my dad only cared about why. I mean, he knew I loved it. My dad knew I loved baseball, but I can remember one day he stuck his head around the dugout and asked me what time halftime was. And I'm going, does anybody know who that guy is? But I'd say, hey, Dad, I threw a no-hitter today. He said, great. What's a no-hitter and how'd you do it? And I tell my mom, I threw a no-hitter. She said, that's great. Did you get an A in English? So outcome in our house it was nice to have a good outcome, but it was more about why and the process that they felt were prioritized. And that took a lot of pressure off me as an athlete because I wasn't afraid to fail. And I'm going to throw it back at you in a second. Most kids are more afraid of the feelings of failure than they are the feelings of winning. And that is a double bind. When it hurts more to lose and it feels good to win, those kids are going to quit before they're out of high school.
Yeah. Is it a fear of losing the game, or is it a fear of all of the external expectations and reactions that go along?
Say that again. It's the fear of all the stuff that goes with a win or a loss.
Yeah, because and the reason I think that's important and for sure correct distinction is because kids love video games, right? And every good video game you can lose. That's what makes it addictive. And you're trying to get to the next level, you're trying to win. But when you lose, it's okay.
It is okay.
You get to try
and
again.
then can hit the restart button.
Yeah.
But when you've actually been out there with human contact and experiencing not only the joys of sport, but the frustration and the pain, what's the ABC's game of the week thing? The joy of this and the whatever that phrase was, it's exactly right. Because the beautiful thing about sports is you're going to feel real good at times and you're going to feel real bad at times, but both of them are part of the process.
So I think I've told you I've made the horrible mistake of coaching my sons, like the little T-ball stuff that we do, whatever you want to call it. And the whole goal is to get these kids to enjoy baseball, right? Like we're not teaching them anything about baseball. We just want them to have fun being out there, and hopefully they come play next year, right? But I find there's a delicate balance between if everything is just fun and there's no competition to it, the kids are picking daisies and I can't keep their attention.
Exactly.
if there's at least a little bit of competition, okay, there's a race, or I'm trying to tag you, I'll run around and play tag with them, or we'll, roll kids ground balls and there's a base and one of the kids is a base runner. A little bit of competition, all of a sudden they're really focused, they're really into it. But then we have to make sure to celebrate the kids that didn't win the competition and tell them how great they did, even though they didn't win. Otherwise, there's full meltdowns.
And the good thing about this is the kids know intuitively without parental influence. They know who the guys that did good and the guys that didn't do good. And they also know who is actually committed to getting better and who doesn't care. And that's another thing that, like, I've got twin grandnephews that are really good lacrosse players. And there's a couple of kids on their lacrosse team. They're just happy being on the team, watching everybody play. And when they put them between the lines, everybody knows that they're out there participating, but they're not really competing. So don't sell your kids short, even at 5 years old. Now I'm going to guess something that your son has experienced. I bet he picks up the bat and the ball and is asking you to play with him all the time.
Um, Not, I mean, a little bit. He's
He's
quickly
got other things
distracted.
that are equally big in his life.
He wants to be outside and like doing stuff all the time, running around, and he's a maniac. And I say in the best way. But like we'll swing the bat and like, he'll take like one or two swings, then he's like, okay,
Okay.
now let's do something else.
Well, what I was hoping that I could lead you into the word called ignition. Remember us talking about what ignition is?
Yeah.
Ignition, I forget which book I read it from. It's when a youngster at some point in his early childhood gets all fired up about something. His imagination, swinging a plastic bat at a wiffle ball, and that's all they want to do. They're consumed by it. Their ignition for that particular thing makes their 90 trillion cells feel really good. Now, as they get a little older, what happens with experience is that the brain starts paring down what you can actually do and be good at, and what doesn't cause you to feel like crap, and what does make you feel good. And you start editing the process. And you have to make sure that they don't edit out the joy of that ignition for whatever it was. And it's okay to start off playing the piano and end up playing a trombone. But they're learning with ignition how to turn joy and fun into competition. And those are the athletes that are Hall of Famers. I'll guarantee you that if you talk to somebody that hasn't played in the big leagues for 20 years, that when they think back on the game, it was fun every day they showed up at the ballpark. I mean, that's the way I feel at 77 years old. I still get excited about getting up and going to the ballpark every morning, even though I'm just a coach now and I can't do what I did 5 years ago. But the ignition from the time I remembered as a 6-year-old, I was going to pitch. I was going to be a pitcher in the big league. I thought the big leagues were the Portland Beavers in Multnomah County Stadium. That was my big leagues. That's where I saw myself. And it carried over. And I was blessed, and this is where I think Mustard does such a good job. I was blessed at every critical point, every juncture in my life that something could have gone crazy. A Sandy Koufax put his hand on my shoulder and said, Tommy House, you got a big league curveball. They're good curveball hitters, but nobody hits a big league curveball. You have a big league curveball. So what do you think I heard about my birth bat? I said, Sandy Koufax told me I got a big league breaking ball. Read it and weep, boys. Here it comes. So
Yeah.
see, I got lucky with that. And there's just as many kids that don't get that positive reinforcement, whose joy of playing gets outweighed by the frustrations of losing or doing something they really don't want to do.
Well, I
So
think, the parents' fear is, that not just that we like miss out on the positive ways to impact our kids, but that you make mistakes that negatively impact them, right? So we've talked about kind of the positive toolkit that athletes can use to manage stress and anxiety, but maybe we can talk a little bit more specifically about some of the things parents and coaches should really avoid? Not to
I
tell
have
a
strong, I
coach
have
not to hang
strong
a
feeling,
football.
yeah.
Yeah.
I have really strong feelings about this. And it's, as a parent or a coach, if you find it's more about you than it is your athlete or your child, you can do better. You have to do better. And unfortunately, because there's so much competition at your age group right now, you realize the value proposition of throwing 95 miles an hour when you're a junior in high school. That's going to get you recognition, possibility of college scholarship, or maybe even to play pro ball. But you have to make sure as a parent that when you lay out the circumstances for him to get better or manage his process, it's not for your ego, but it's for the sustaining of his, if
Yeah.
that makes any sense. And it's hard because we're all competitive. I can remember one of the hardest things for me to do was watch my kids fail at anything. I mean, it tore me up to a point where I'd give anything to have them not fail, because I probably felt worse than they did. Then I would go back to what my mom told me. You're going to learn more from your screw ups than you are from your successes. Just ask yourself why. If it doesn't kill you, it's a good experience.
I was on a call today with somebody from Major League Baseball. I mentioned that to you before the call.
Right.
And I asked him, how many major leaguers are there who were playing, like who were major league pitchers who were playing serious year-round travel ball at a young age, 12 or 13, and were pitchers on the team and were pitching year-round? He said there were shockingly few. He couldn't think of one. And he's the guy who knows all the players. So I think there's something interesting there for us parents, and it relates to the way we put stress and anxiety on our kids. Are you trying to set, if your kid's got the ignition and he's really into baseball, are you trying to set that kid up for success at 18 or 20? Or are you trying to make them the best 13-year-old baseball player they could possibly be?
Could you say that again?
If your child is really into baseball, I would suggest the proper goal is to think about setting them up to be the best they can be at 18 or 20 and not the best they can be at 13.
You can be the best player in the league at age 16. Those people I call it the Michelle Wie syndrome. Michelle Wie was as good at 16 as she is now. She's more experienced now, but most Hall of Famers were late bloomers. And it's the process that makes it worthwhile.
They got to have the ignition. What's going to make you good at 20 is it's what brings you joy, and you're doing it all the time. And so let me ask the question differently to you, similar to what I asked the MLB guy today. How many major leaguers do you think there are whose parents were like really hard on them growing up and basically gave the kid the kid's ignition?
I don't know if I really have to go through my Rolodex to figure out who they actually were. Here's another one that will complement what your guy from MLB said. What percentage of the kids that play in the Little League World Series, what percentage of those kids get to the big leagues, do you think?
One, I mean, very rarely.
Yeah, less than 2%. So it's okay to be good at 13 or 14, but you don't have to be the best. You don't have to be anything other than the best you can be at that point in time. Because every time, and we've talked about this off camera, you grow 2 inches and gain 10 pounds, you're a different body than you were 6 months ago. So the process of getting to be the best you can be is way more difficult than you think. And it's why there's only been, I think, 17,000 major leaguers in the history of baseball.
So what can a parent do? Let's say a parent of a 12 or 14-year-old, what can they do to help make baseball more joyful for their child as opposed to things that make it more stressful?
Instead of you putting expectations on them, have them in effect tell you what their expectations are. When you're driving to the ballpark, what do you want to get done today? You're just going to hang out and check some fly balls? If you ask a youngster what he wants to do, and you give him a time to do it in, and you just tell him to have a good time and make sure that he gives the best he can, but don't put numbers on him. Don't say you got to strike everybody or you got to hit home runs. Just be the best you can be and make sure you've done everything that your coaches and you know you need to do to get better. And that process is how you judge yourself, not the outcome. And the really cool thing is, best players don't always win, best prepared players do. And eventually, these kids get it. And can I emphasize it one more time? You might think that watching a bunch of 12-year-olds on the bench, that they don't have any clue on what's going on, but they can tell you who the best player is. They can tell you who the laziest guy is, the hardest worker. They can tell you who they want coming to home plate when they have to win a game. They can tell you who they have the most fun hanging out with. They're very intuitive. And then after the game, it's a no-fly zone. After the game, get in the car, go have your pizza, your milkshake, or whatever the post-game stuff is, and let your child be the one that sets the conversation tone. Did that make sense what I just said?
It makes total sense about that. And I think Lindsay Bear has done a great blog with you about that, the car ride
Okay,
home.
yeah.
You should suggest to people they check that out. What about for a parent? You know, again, let's think maybe a little bit older, 12 through high school, and a parent notices that, okay, their child's still playing and still doing their best at it, but you can notice as a parent that the stress levels have really creeped up to an unhealthy level.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with asking why. What can we do? You know, I notice you're kind of have a little frown on your face, but again, this is not right after the game. This is when you can't go wrong with asking a question. All right. If you ask a question, it requires some kind of a response.
Yeah.
And dads and teenage sons, this is usually the response. They go, whatever. You have to realize that's a defense mechanism. He really doesn't actually know exactly why he's not happy or things aren't going right. But if you continue to be consistent, and it's real. It's not about you as a parent making you feel good. It's about you as a parent figuring out how this can be a good experience for number one, your son or your daughter, and everybody around you. Then it kind of spreads the pressure out and doesn't focus so much on an outcome.
The strategy of asking questions, would you suggest that to coaches too?
Yeah. It's the Socratic method. You and I have been, I don't know, I think we've been palling around for almost 10 years now. And I ask more questions than I give statements to. And what it does, when you ask a question, it tells you whether your kids are listening to you. That lets you know what kind of an instructor you were. Or if they're not listening, that shows up also. But either way, it requires some kind of feedback. And your feedback is how you basically change your approach or make the adjustments necessary. It's called reframing, to make sure that your message and the message that your athlete or your child is listening to are actually meaning the same thing.
You deal with such a interesting mix of professional athletes. I mean, obviously you deal with youngsters too, but just at the professional level, you obviously have a lot of superstars that we all know about in multiple sports. But you're also dealing with guys that I would say are dealing with even more stressful situations than the superstars, right? I've seen you have a lot of guys coming to you for the first time after they got released, right? And they're trying to figure out whether they can make it back into the big leagues or wherever they were. You've got guys that haven't made it to the big leagues that still feel like they can and still seem to have the physical tools to do it. Don't know if they're going to get their break. Don't know if they're going to find their next job, really, right?
Right.
How much does your being aware of an athlete's stress level affect the way you coach them?
Oh, and again, I'd like to say I had this figured out early as a coach. This is, I've been coaching since I got released in 1979. And I'm just now getting comfortable with reading any kind of an athlete, male or female, that comes into our environment. And it's a little bit of gut feel. It's a little bit of, because I've seen so many kids, like our boy Joey Steele is really good. but he's 28 years old and he's right-handed. And he just came back from Australia where he threw 80 innings, walked 4 people, and gave up 1 home run the whole time he was over there. And nobody knows he's alive. So when we got back, our first conversation was, what do I have to do to get noticed? And I said, you just have to keep doing what you're doing. And all you have to do is find one scout that likes you and wants to give you a shot, and then you're fine. And I'll put it right on the table. You're not married. You don't have a mortgage. Is there anything you'd rather be doing right now than playing baseball? He said, no. Then I said, shut up, get your boo-boo lip, put it back where it belongs, and go have fun. Because if you'd rather not be doing anything else, then you're right where you belong.
Mm-hmm. No, really interesting. I would think, Joey's got his head on so straight, and some guys that might have a really higher stress level, maybe you can't tell them to put the boo-boo lip away, right?
Yeah, and with those guys, you have to keep asking them questions until they answer what till they find the answer to their question.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? Like they'll show up and not know why they're angry at the world. So you don't cut right to the chase. You just kind of chip away, and you don't want to hit a nerve, but you want to get them going. It's called insight. Remember, there's insight, hindsight, and foresight. And you're always trying to match those up with where the athlete is and where he sees himself. Remember, and I'm going deep on this. Let me know if I'm going too deep.
Nope.
There's the person you are, the person you want to be, and the person that people see.
Mm-hmm.
And matching those 3 things up as an athlete, as a coach, as a parent is sometimes pretty difficult, but it is doable.
Yeah. I think Tom, super valuable. I hope people are taking a lot of value from it. Maybe we can try to summarize kind of some of the key takeaways. And if anybody has any last questions while we do this, please fire away. But I think it seems to me like the first thing is sort of an assessment, self-assessment or an assessment of your kid or athlete. Do they have an appropriate level of stress and anxiety, or has it morphed into distress where it's unhealthy level of stress, or anxiety levels are so high that it's doing things like affecting.
You're just one step ahead of me. They have to understand that stress and anxiety are normal. Everybody has it. Some people go through higher levels of it, but everybody is stressed and anxiety at some time. And it's how you match that up and go after it, not to let it get in the way of the joy of competition. Because ask whether they want to stop playing because they're not having fun, or they want to stop playing because there's too much stress or anxiety. Very few of them will say there's too much stress or anxiety to say they're not having fun anymore.
Perfect. So kind of category 1, I think we're on the same page, is sort of an assessment.
Yeah, problem identification, assess.
Stress and anxiety is normal, but we want to assess and make sure what the athlete is experiencing is within a normal, healthy range.
Exactly. And then you have to give them a toolkit to help them specifically address the way they process. There's one set of rules. There's a million interpretations.
And so some of the things we've talked about in the toolkit, simple things like smiling or laughing.
Yeah.
Making sure we're not doing too much time traveling with, staying up the night before. We run through a few scenarios, but
and let it go.
Let it go. Play the game.
Maybe when the time traveling is getting in the way of sleep, getting in the way of being able to relax and eat a good meal, then it's too much. That's where distress gets into the equation.
And then for coaches and parents, we want to make sure we're not adding stress unnecessarily. We're going to do some naturally, whether we like it or not. And so there's no reason to try to add more. And so we're going to do things like ask questions. We're going to do things like be quiet on the car ride home. You kind of mentioned this offhand, but I like there's some kind of joyful routine after the game. We're going to get milkshakes. We're going to In-N-Out all the time, whatever it is. There's something it's always joyful stuff that we're associating with the sport and not added pressure. Is that fair?
You're exactly what you just described right there is why 80% of male and female athletes in the world today quit playing sports by age 15, because there's no joy in it anymore. for whatever the reason, it's become work that's stressful and anxiety, and they go on another thing. And think about how, I think that's why you and I got to know each other. Think about how many potential Nolan Ryans went home, how
Yeah.
many potential Tom Brady's went home, or whoever the kids' heroes are today. So we want to keep them involved, and I think this is one of Mustard's mission statements. We want kids to be involved with sport, at least through high school, and the difference in their lives is exponential.
We want them to keep doing it, but it's got to be joyful.
Exactly.
It's not a forced march, and a lot of the joy can be trying different sports too, right? And that might be how you create the best athletes.
And you dads that are button heads with your teenage sons, remember they're button heads with you now, but by the time they're 22 or 23, they'll be your best friend.
Yeah. Well, I gotta go downstairs and make sure my 5-year-old gets his weightlifting in and is throwing in for tonight.
Yeah. So put the gun on him.
Yeah, well, yeah, of course. Yeah, we would never throw without a radar gun. Yeah.
Rocky, it's always fun hanging out with you. And we need to do more of these because you're, basically you're working your fanny off to make Mustard happen worldwide. We forget what we're in this for. Because basically we're coaches. We're ex-players that are now coaches. You're doing it as a dad. I'm still coaching. I'm living the dream. And people don't realize how lucky you can be if you just let the process take care of itself.
Yeah, Tom, thanks for doing this with everybody. I know it was a treat for me.
Okay.
I learned more. I hope everybody else learned something too. We'll look forward to
Awesome.
doing it again soon.